Hey, welcome to Wednesday night. I'm glad that you're here. We're going to be in the book of Joshua tonight. We're going to be in chapter 2. And a couple things that I want to bring to your attention real quick is I want to ask you a question. Is there anything that you know of that God cannot do? Because I think there's something that God cannot do because of his power. He doesn't have the power to do this. There's no way for him to do this. He can raise people from the dead. He can heal the sick. He can create galaxies and universes. But he cannot do this one thing. And so I'm going to reveal that to you tonight as we go through our text. What the one thing is God cannot do, his power will not do. But amazingly, on the other side of that coin, you and I have the power to do this. And we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. The other thing I want to talk with you, my church family, about is everything going on right now. It's such a wild time. It's a wild life. These are times that none of us have really ever seen with the virus and the lockdowns and the unrest and the political strife that we're having in this country and really around the world. It's really a man virus, a virus of evil and bad that's really affected our whole world. And I know it troubles me, and I know it troubles many of you as well. And so we're going to, as we go through our text tonight, we're going to talk about, toward the end tonight of my message, we're going to talk about some things that we can do. How do we handle this as Christians with the things that are going on right now? But we're going to start in Joshua chapter 2. And we're going to start talking here about Jericho. And the spies are going into Jericho to scout out this land that's before them and see what they can pick up. What kind of intelligence can they gain? And in verse 1 it says, "And Joshua the son of Nun sent 2 men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, 'Go view the land, especially Jericho.' And they went and came into the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab, and lodged there." Now I got a question for you. Have you ever wondered why these guys went to this prostitute, to this Rahab's house? You know, I've never really thought a lot about it. I've heard this story many times. As a child, it's one of the stories we hear in our Bible classes, and I've never thought a whole lot about it. But they went to Rahab's place. And listen, many of our versions call her a prostitute or a harlot, and another word in Hebrew for harlot is innkeeper. And so I really don't know what Rahab was. She's called a prostitute many times, and that's probably what we'll go with here, because there's no mention of her having a husband. In fact, we'll find out she gets married later to someone else, so she couldn't have a husband. It's highly unlikely she was probably an innkeeper, but for whatever reason, in the position that Rahab was in Jericho, she would have knowledge of a lot of things. She would be able to tell these guys maybe some intelligence that they wouldn't know, and she would probably ask less questions of them. And she was used to entertaining foreigners, used to entertaining people that didn't live in Jericho, that would come to town and they would come and visit her. And so maybe that's why these guys are going in. I mean, we got to think, again, these guys are spies. If they were caught, what would happen to them? Well, almost certainly they would be put to death, if not worse. Because sometimes with men, there's worse things than death. And so they came on this mission. You know, think about James Bond type thing, that some covert intelligence. They're sneaking around. They're trying to blend in with the crowd, and they're going to this place that a lot of foreigners would go to, this place where Rahab's at, and hopefully they can also, while hiding and staying undercover, hopefully they can get some intelligence from Rahab, who is one of these people that knows a lot of things or meets a lot of people. So in verse 2 it says, "And it was told to the king of Jericho." The king found out, right? Behold, men of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land. They're here to spy on us, king. Then the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, bring out the men who have come to you, who entered your house, for they have come to search out all the land. Now think again about the relationship that Rahab had with this king. The king didn't send soldiers to kick in the door. He sent a message to her to have these guys turned over. That tells us, that maybe gives us a hint that Rahab has a relationship with the palace. Maybe she did some business with the palace, but maybe she was counted on among the palace. But there was some sort of a relationship there, and you're going to see that Rahab's going to risk all of that here in just a minute. Verse 4, but the woman had taken the two men and hidden them. She said, true. Here's what her report was back to the king. It's true, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from, and when the gate was about to be closed at dark, the men went out. I do not know where the men went. You better pursue them quickly, get after them, for you will overtake them. But she had brought them up to the roof and hid them with the stalks of flax that she had laid in order on the roof. So she tells them that the men left when the gate was about to be closed. Now, does that happen in a walled city like Jericho? People come in every day into that city that don't live there, do business there, maybe purchase some goods there, and then before the gate closes, they leave because they don't want to be trapped there. So it was a story that could be plausible, but she had hidden them on the roof under some flax, and it turns out that flax is something that they could make fabric and cloth from the leaves of the flax plant. So she had hid them there. And in verse 7 it says, so the men pursued after them on the way to the Jordan as far as the fords, and the gate was shut as soon as the pursuers had gone out. So they went on their way. In verse 8, before the men lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted. And there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that, as I have dealt kindly with you, you also will deal kindly with my father's house, and give me a sure sign that you will save alive my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. And the men said to her, our life is yours even to the death, if you do not tell this business of ours. Then when the Lord gives us the land, we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. You know, we've already established that Rahab was a sinful person. She lived a life that probably had a lot of downs to it. Can you imagine Rahab walking freely in the markets in the city, and other women shunning her and calling attention to their husbands when they see her, and just ripping Rahab and just really putting her down and laughing about her? Now, why would the women do that? Why would they point Rahab out to their husbands and really tear her apart, tear her character apart? It's because they're guarding their husband. That's their husband. That's their man. And they don't want him to fall into the traps and temptations that a person like Rahab might be able to offer. And so they would tear her down. So she probably had kind of a lonely life. She was a shunned a person. Even in a sinful city, she was looked down upon. And I want you to notice something here. Rahab starts talking about some things that they've heard that God did for the Israelites. And the things that they've heard about happened years ago. They even probably happened before Rahab was born. So these tales of the greatness of the God of Israel have been told and told over and over again, and they're legendary. And I don't know what God they worshipped in the city here in Jericho, but it certainly wasn't the God of Israel. And so I can imagine that sometimes in Rahab's life, when she pondered and thought about her life and her situation, I can imagine that she wished somehow that she worshiped a God like the God of Israel, that she was a daughter of the God of Israel, that she could be protected by the God of Israel. And to you and me, that's hard to understand. See, Tina and I, we've traveled to Honduras, and we've worshiped and worked with the congregation there in Santa Ana. And they worship the same God that you and I worship. But in Rahab's day, every kingdom had their own God. Every kingdom had their own idol that they worshiped. And to her, worshiping a God that wasn't there in her city would be like us here at Farmington deciding we don't want to be the Cardinals anymore. We want to be the Tigers, like Prairie Grove. That's just odd to us. The Tigers are Prairie Grove's mascot, not Farmington's. We're the Cardinals. So that's the only way that I think I can explain this, is that Rahab did not believe she could ever have the covenant and the coverage and the security and safety and the blessings of the God of Israel. And when she found these men from Israel, I can just imagine her eyes lighting up. I can imagine her heart burning bright because she knew this was her opportunity. See, she took a huge risk here. She took a huge risk with her life. If the king found out what she had done, what do you think would have happened to Rahab? I imagine he would have put her to death. Now listen, this is the Old Testament. This is back in the day, right? The king probably wouldn't have just put her to death. He probably would have put her mother and father to death and her brothers and sisters that she listed here to death. And he probably would have done worse than that. He probably would have burned all of her possessions that she had. And if she had any livestock or animals, he probably would have killed them as well. I mean, it wasn't good enough just to kill Rahab. They went after your whole family and everything that you owned. So she risked a lot. But Rahab, in her risking, she could also see, on one side, there's this fear, this risk. But on the other side, there's this realization that there could be salvation. There could be freedom under the God of Israel. And Rahab, for whatever reason, had the faith and the audacity to take that road less traveled. I mentioned to you earlier that there's one thing that God cannot create. And the one thing that God cannot create or make is our faith. God can't create that. If God zaps you and I and causes us to be faithful and we lose our free will, we're not faithful anymore. We're robots. So we've got to have free will. We've got to have good and evil for us to make decisions and choose faith and choose God. And Rahab's faith was huge here. I mean, she's mentioned in the Faith Hall of Fame in Hebrews chapter 11, right, with all those other great people. She's mentioned a few other times. I believe she's mentioned in the book of James. But did you know there's another place that Rahab is mentioned? In the book of Matthew. See, we find out later that Rahab ended up marrying one of these spies. What kind of man would marry a prostitute, a sinful woman like Rahab? Well, he may have just seen in her what God also saw in her. But her and her husband, this spy that she marries, went on to have children, and they had children. And if you look in the first part of Matthew, when you read through the genealogy of Jesus Christ, you will find Rahab's name in that genealogy. See, you look around today in politicians that have sketchy relationships with people in their past that maybe aren't good people or evil people. They'll deny those relationships. They'll absolutely refuse to acknowledge those relationships. They'll play those relationships down. They don't want anything to do with them. They want to cover them up. They don't want you to find out about them. But here God has this prostitute, Rahab, and he puts her right there. Not only in the Bible, but he puts her in the genealogy so that we see that she's in the genealogy of Christ. Not because of her actions and sinful life, but she's there because of her righteousness in her faith. Faith to God is so pure. He doesn't look at life the way you and I do. He doesn't see it the way humans do. He sees our faith, and he saw Rahab's faith. So verse 15, they made this promise to her. You do this, you put this cord in the window, you get everyone in here, and we'll take care of them. Verse 15, then she let them down by a rope through a window, for her house was built into the city wall, so that she lived in the wall. And by the way, the walls of Jericho, the outside wall was 6 feet thick, and the inside wall was 12 feet thick. Verse 16, and she said to them, go into the hills, or the pursuers will encounter you, and hide there 3 days until the pursuers have returned. See, she sent the pursuers in the opposite direction. And so she tells these spies to go the other way. Then the men said to her, we will be guiltless with respect to this oath of yours that you have made us swear. Behold, when we come into the land, you shall tie this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and you shall gather your house and your father and your mother and your brothers and your father's household. Then if anyone goes out of the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head, and we shall be guiltless. But if a hand is laid on anyone who is with you in the house, his blood shall be on our head. But if you tell this business of ours, then we shall be guiltless with respect to your oath that you have made us swear. In other words, Rahab, if you tell on us, the deal's off. Verse 21, she said, according to your words, so be it. Then she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. They departed and went into the hills and remained there 3 days until the pursuers returned. And the pursuers searched all along the way and found nothing. Then the 2 men returned. They came down from the hills and passed over and came to Joshua the son of Nun, and they told him all that had happened to them. And they said to Joshua, truly the Lord has given all the land into our hands. And also all the inhabitants of the land melt away because of us. See, Rahab had told them exactly what they needed to know. She told them that the hearts of men failed them in the city of Jericho because of the great works that they had heard of God. You know, we've got a lot of things going on in life right now. We've got a lot of craziness going on in life. It's making things difficult. It's making things difficult for us to come here and be together. It's hard for us to go and visit people that we want to see, loved ones that we want to see. People aren't allowed to, have weddings and funerals right now. It's just a But there's been wild times before. Christians have been through some craziness before. We've been through times before in our past where evil was called good by men and good was condemned by men and called evil. Some of the things we're living through right now sound a lot like that, but if you read our ancestors, if you read the good book, our fellow Christians have been through these things before. You know, I'm a Star Wars fan, and one of my favorite Star Wars movie is The Empire Strikes Back. And in The Empire Strikes Back, there's a scene where the Empire in their big, huge, Darth Vader's big ship is chasing the Millennium Falcon with Han Solo in it, and Princess Leia and Chewbacca and C-3PO. They're trying to chase the ship. And Darth Vader is in his private quarters. He's meditating or something. He's there taking a break. And the screen pops up, and the admiral who's at the bridge of the ship cuts in and says, "Lord Vader, we have a situation." And Lord Vader says, "What is it?" And he said, "The Millennium Falcon has went into an asteroid field, and we just can't pursue them or we'll be all torn apart." Now, this admiral is trying to take this big ship in the asteroid field, and they're avoiding the big asteroids, and they got their gunners shooting the little asteroids, blowing them up. But the ship's getting beat up, and it's getting hit. And this admiral knows Darth Vader. He knows how tough Darth Vader is. He knows how mean and evil he is and how much he demands of people. And so he comes to Darth Vader and he says, "We got this problem. We got all these asteroids. We got to give up the chase or we're going to get torn apart." He thinks, finally, I've got some logic. I've got some reasoning. I've got a really good excuse. There's no way Darth Vader can say no to my suggestion. And so he pauses a second and Vader responds. And Darth Vader, here's what he told the admiral. He said, "Asteroids do not concern me." In Joshua chapter 24, Joshua's reminding the people where they came from, what God has done for them and their ancestors, and how far he's brought them. And he's trying to renew the covenant of the people. He's trying to get the people refocused on their mission and on God. And he says in verse 15, he says, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Guys, it's crazy out there right now. And there's a lot of craziness going on. And there's a lot of weird, twisted thinking that's hitting mainstream. A lot of asteroids, right? A lot of asteroids floating around, pelting us. And I'm not saying don't pay attention to the asteroids. You know, the Darth Vader's ship didn't. They blew them up and they shot them. They tried to avoid them as best they could. But what I am saying is stay on the mission. As Darth Vader said, asteroids do not concern me. I know they're there. They're a pain. They're a threat. They're a problem. But that's not what we're after. And Joshua told the people the same thing. Despite everything else, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. You know, Tayton has a shirt that she wears, and it says, "Remember who you are, and remember whose you are." See, Christians are a peculiar people. We don't view these things in life the way that the world does. We view them through the eyes of a saved people that worship a sovereign, all-powerful God. Take this time to draw close to your Savior. Take this time to learn more about Him, to know about Him, to get in the Word, to read the Scriptures, to know and walk with Him and grow stronger in your faith like Rahab did, and watch God work in your life. Have an awesome, awesome rest of the week.